right, guys, welcome back to episode 7, part 2. We're back with part 2, okay? So we're going to jump right into the conversation. We're going to jump right back in where we left off. Let's go. Get ready.
It's like I'm laughing because I will say, you know, if you're in a situation, the first strategy is document everything because the script will change more often than the narcissist mood. Okay. So if you're in any type of legal or divorce, document. And because here's the thing, that narcissists are all up in court. That's another place. Communal narcissist, cerebral narcissist. So, from the judges to the lawyers to, to the person that you're representing. So, hey, if you can learn some of, how to just be of your own, like Dozier, you were saying, like, not just being impermeable to that need, right? To their supply, right? Okay. But there's personal strategies, right? Boundaries, establishing, maintaining clear boundaries, right? I have a colleague, friend of mine, who she specializes in psychotherapy with narcissism. Shout out to Dr. Richardson. But that's hard work, right? Strong boundaries, right? Cancellation policy must, be enforced. No exceptions made. No, it's just really strong, right? This includes limits on communication, on interaction, specifying conditions for visitation if there's children involved, adhering to agreed upon parenting plans, right? Um, so and then I mentioned documenting everything, keeping detailed records of all interactions, agreements, incidents involving this narcissistic person. This documentation can be crucial in legal proceedings or when disputes arise, but also can be helpful if you find yourself going back into rationalizing and justifying, right? This is where self-reflection and journaling, so even if you're not documenting for a legal purpose, self-reflecting and journaling after interactions, after disputes, after when you're feeling activated can be helpful. Your support system, right? You're, building a strong support network, friends, family, professionals who understand the situation, right? And can provide, practical assistance as well as emotional support. Legal resources if that's necessary, so family law attorneys, restraining orders if there's a threat of harm, parenting plans being put in place. Hopefully it doesn't get to the point where you need like casas or court appointed child advocates. In some cases that may need to be addressed, which is kind of like a guardian ad litem to represent the child's best interest. That's when it gets really ugly in parenting disputes. But therapy, right, for you as a victim, and I really use that term victim very loosely because a lot of this is not any one of us can fall into this narcissistic trap, right? And so if you choose to use the word victim, but I do understand some people feel like this is a very disempowering word. So, I'm just using that in the course of our discussion today. But if you have found yourself, in a relationship or dealing with a narcissist, therapy can be very helpful. And also for children, if children are involved, that can provide a safe space to express their feelings. Support groups. So there's numerous support groups for individuals who have endured narcissistic abuse or enduring narcissistic abuse. Single parents navigating co-parenting challenges. And groups can offer solidarity, understanding, practical advice, right? It's always good to, have conversations and hear from other people who know what you're going through. There's online resources, there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you're in California, there's the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence that offers resources. And, you have to understand that even if there's not a physical component, we're still could be dealing with domestic violence, right? And so there's support and guidance for those dealing with abusive relationships. And then there's nationally available resources like legal aid and psychological associations. So those are kind of the basic things, right? But the personal strategies, I think, are what's going to be, the floor level, right? All the others that can build upon, but you really need to have a space to kind of express yourself and have a community of people, um, and also really learn how to emotionally regulate, right, and to communicate effectively and concisely, because that's another thing. Say very little. Say what you need to say. Very little. The longer, because again, the more a narcissist gets you talking, that's just narcissistic supply, right? So being able to say what you need to say, keeping it short, sweet, to the point, not being emotionally involved as much as possible, right? And then having, and I will add to that, physical movement and exercise. Brooke, always talk about this, right? Like, that is a personal strategy. If you can, Dozier, we were talking about you can wrestle, kickbox, do, do some challenging exercise. It can be really helpful to get those emotions out, because after you finally get out, your body can be worn down, mentally and physically worn down. So don't wait until afterwards. Like, oh, just let me get through this and then I'm going to start. No, if you're going through this and as part of your personal strategy, exercise and movement.
Thank you for that reminder. Um, I will say this just to speak to some of your points. The importance of setting boundaries is, oh my gosh, I can't stress that enough. And thank you for that constant reminders during our discussions, one on one. And I'm so glad you made that distinction of it doesn't always have to be physical abuse, because what I see most often in the women specifically that I know that are dealing with narcissistic co-parents in the legal system, is more of an emotional abuse and financial abuse. A lot of people, that is very, people don't talk about the financial aspect. I mean, I have seen someone purposely make a woman drain her resources just because he wanted to continue to carry out this fight. I mean, very trivial things became, monumental, and it was very unfortunate. And until she made the decision to say, I'm done. Enough is enough. I mean, this person would have continued to drag this out, drag this out, you know. So thank you. Thank you for speaking to that.
Yeah, the court proceeding and dragging things out in court, that's attention. That's, admiration. That's, their opportunity, right? To feed off of your emotions, right? To inflict this self-importance and this grandiosity. Yeah. That's unfortunate, because it can, it then becomes, making a mockery of the court system, right? And the abusing the court, and some of these cases can go years and years and years, just because one narcissistic parent can't just be, rational and empathetic and self-aware and accountable. Those are those three qualities.
It won't happen. This
Oh,
person, it took 7 years. 7 years.
I don't know if I've seen, like I said, I have a colleague that works in this field, and she's told me she's had some success stories, right, in treating um MPD. I I'm trying to believe it. Again, that's my implicit bias, but I don't know if I've really seen, in terms of a co-parenting situation, the narcissistic parent really get put in their place, or like justice served. I think what you mentioned, where the rational, emotional, mature party, usually the party that has the best interest of the child at heart, right? That's the one that usually drops it's just like, okay, whatever he wants, whatever they want, let's just end this, right? I don't think I've recalled, and I've worked in the parenting space, in the family therapy space for a long time, a lot of years. I don't think I've really ever seen that. Um, so that's unfortunate.
From my experience, I've seen it be just basically taboo to even mention narcissism in the court, system, because it's almost, I get it. Lawyers and judges are not, in the psychological realm. They're not in that field. They can't really make those distinctions and diagnose people. But I feel like it is unfortunate, and it is such a disservice to, um, the family unit as the whole. This child that really needs, a third party to come in and really decide like what is fair, what is the best in the best interest of this child.
That's a hard one too, right? Because on the surface, the narcissist, they're going to do everything on the surface, right? To make it look like, they are whatever a good parent, or, all of the things. They're going to do all that on the surface. And then the judge has to kind of figure out. But here's the thing, and judges won't say it. Sometimes I think I have heard one judge like, you lay down with this person, you chose to be. So if they have a substance abuse problem, if they got bipolar, or if they got narcissism, this is still your co-parent. So it then becomes the relevancy, like, okay, it makes court difficult, right? But in a judge's mind, it's still not a reason to not go through with, the custody, or the visitation, or what, you know what I mean? Because they're not going to say, okay, you get no visitation rights because you're a narcissist and you've made this very difficult. There's really no legal bearing. Now, you can theoretically say, like, look, they're a narcissist, so of course they're neglecting the child in some way, or they're not disciplining the child. Like, we can theorize, right? But where's the proof of, like, how will we get that? So that's what makes it doubly hard. I do think a lot of times people know, like, in their back of their mind, like, okay, this person is, we're dealing with someone that is really a narcissist. But what can they do?
I was just gonna say, I think you spoke a lot to like resources in the sense of identifying certain things, but as a parent, right, when you have to co-parent with a narcissistic partner, right, person, etc., how do you safeguard the children, right? Because I think, if you spend your whole life being nurtured by a narcissistic parent, I feel like the odds of you, or your child mutating in a sort of sense, right? Like, or taking on some of those characteristics is at a higher level. So if I'm the parent who is seemingly non-narcissistic, how do I protect my child really mainly, right, from, or what resources do I have to try to teach them without necessarily bashing their parent, right? Because we don't know how they came to be narcissistic, right? So how do I balance and teach them, give them the tools to I guess maybe avoid or not absorb those characteristics?
That's an excellent question. I think it is. The good news is, though, when we talk about, narcissism is made, not born. It's a sociopathy versus like a psychopathy, right? So ensuring that, your child, even if they're with you 50% of the time, 75% of the time, 30% of the time, has a very social and emotionally nurturing environment, right? You talk about emotions, you allow emotions to be expressed, you model emotional regulation, right? You make yourself emotionally available. You are attuned to your child's needs, right? Like you're not just, because probably in the narcissistic household, they're getting walked by. A child could be, so for instance, if a child had a bad day at school, right? They're at home, they're sulking around. A narcissistic parent won't even recognize that the child is having a bad day at school, right? An attuned parent is going to go, Johnny, what's going on? Why are you so sad? What's happening? You look sad. You don't look like yourself, right? So being attuned to your child, communicating, right? And then for you, again, you modeling emotional regulation, coping, right? Stress, management, right? Happiness, right? And self-awareness, accountability, and empathy. You do those things, you're less likely to have a child. And your child will also recognize the deficits of the other parent. Won't stop the love, right? But what you'll be doing is armoring and helping to arm your child to be in a relationship with that parent, right? Now, when that child gets to be an adult, that narcissistic parent, has to deal with developing that relationship with that child. So yeah.
I think that it's a very interesting, I would not wager a guess or to try to diagnose either of my parents. And I wouldn't want to say anything that seems disparaging because they may at some point tune into this podcast. But what I will say is I see a very heavy correlation to baby boomer / whatever that generation is right after baby boomer parents having narcissistic qualities, right? And feeling as if I may have possibly dealt with two parents, right? Something I try to often do with my son when I see he's like unable to regulate. Because I think the thing is with those parents in that group, they expected very adult emotional reasoning from children that were very incapable of that. And then if they had cognitive dissonance going on of their own, they weren't able to emotionally support any emotional development, which is why I think there are so many empathic children in my generation, right? Those that are deeply feeling. And so I think that kind of creates this cycle of like narcissistic parent, child, empathetic child, narcissistic partner, right? Empathetic child, right? So in noting that my son is very empathetic, I already notice a pattern that he has friends around that he will make excuses for it. Well, so-and-so did X, but I could tell that they were having a bad day, or so-and-so did Y. And so what I had to start saying to him is, just because you understand or can identify someone's emotions does not make them your responsibility. I said, and then also, you're very similar to me where you'll have a delayed response. You'll get home, you'll seem happy, and then your mood will immediately shift because I'm your safe space, right? To being moody and brooding and difficult. And so what I try to explain to him is, we talk about things like agreements. You and I have an agreement, right? Mommy doesn't do spankings, but in order for that agreement to be carried out, there are things on your end you're responsible for. I speak to you at this level without yelling, without getting upset, and you in kind, right? Do your best because I understand we're in different places, emotional development wise, right? To articulate to me what you're experiencing, right? But then also you have to render the respective understanding. Once you have articulated it, there may be additional conversation, or I may say, here's the answer. This is what we're going with at the moment, right? That doesn't mean we can't re-enter that conversation later, but at the present moment, because sometimes adults have to make decisions that you may not understand for safety, right? There's a plethora of reasons why an adult may say, hey, listen, you go this way, you go that way. And as a kid, because my son is very like right and wrong oriented, right? He's very like, and I've often wondered if both of us are possibly on the neurodivergent scale, right? Because we are both very much like, this is right and wrong. This is left and right. But I said, you have to understand that in that moment, the adult only has a certain amount of visual. People think that often adults are always right and children are the ones that are dishonest. But most typically, children are the ones that are baldly honest, and adults are projecting their perspective onto children, right? And so I said, And it's a very difficult, this is like a multi-layered issue when you're raising a Black young man, right? As well, because you see the projections happening. And so you have to try to explain to your kid so many, that's just a deeper subject. But my whole point of it all was, I think, like you said, it's those boundaries. And then the resource for the parent is like, although they see this 50% of the time at their dad's house, right? I don't necessarily have to work overdrive because the child will notice just the difference in general of how you treat them, how you respond to them, how you interact with them. And although right now that parent makes them like they're superhero because they're in that phase where when you lean to their interests, they feel like that you love them more. But as they continue to grow and their support and the things they need evolve, they'll know. And I think that's very hard for mothers sometimes because there's that guilt factor of like, I'm trying everything. And this parent still seems to be their favorite. But I've seen the shift in that happen. My father used to be my son's favorite all the time, right? And I think that as you start to observe behaviors, they're like, I don't know how I feel about that. And when you see those shifts, you know, like, okay, I just need to stay the course. I don't need to overperform, right? I just need to stay the course of what I'm doing. And I think that's hard for parents in general, looking at it like the long game, because we're in a society now where payoff is immediate. So I know I said a lot, but hopefully that, you know.
No, you actually have a lot of points, you know, on the head. There is a lot of research into the correlation of narcissistic parenting and the baby boomer generation, right? They were parented by the greatest generation, right? The great generation, or the greatest generation of all time, whatever they were called, right? But that was really in their parenting in the baby boomers, Dr. Spock, right? And he was like the, you know, the parenting, you know, big psychologist, sociologist at that time. And it was very child focused, right? And so what happened is you know, they developed a generation of entitled adults, right? The baby boomers did expect their children to have this kind of adult experience, right? And but at the same time, and you mentioned how you talk to your child and you're like, okay, tell me how you feel. How you feel may not change the outcome, because as an adult, I may know some things that you just don't know and understand. But that doesn't mean that we don't communicate about it. That is a foreign concept to a baby boomer parent, right? Child is seen, not heard. This is what has to happen. I remember my dad used to proudly say, you have zero rights in this house, zero rights. Right? It's like horrible, right? And then also, because there was this strong sense of entitlement for how they were raised, you know, they have these adult tantrums as parents and oftentimes don't know how to emotionally regulate. So they just shut down and ignore the child, right? So the child does something age appropriately wrong, right? This oftentimes definitely plays out in the teenage years. Okay, 16-year-olds, they lie, they sneak out the house. Okay, probably gonna happen. They're gonna break curfew. But, you know, a lot of times, you know, the parents, you know, take this so personal. It's just so bad. You know, how could you do this to me? Right? You know, a lot of it is ego, the way it looks, because, oh my goodness, Amarri, I have the best child. Right? I'm doing the best job parenting. And so they just don't know how to like handle these basic things. They take it as a personal slight against them, right? This, you know, and they don't know how to emotionally regulate. So they end up really doing a lot more damage, right? To the child. So, you know, it is this cycle. And then you mentioned the empathy.
All right, guys, we're going to pause it again. I mean, it just keeps getting better and better. We're going to take a pause for the cause. Look over your notes again, digest it. Come back next Sunday with us for more with Amarri Simms. We're going to wrap this episode up and she's going to share some final thoughts. And if you guys want to have her back, if you have any more questions or topics that you would want to discuss with her, and she's a marriage and family therapist, feel free to let us know once again in the DMs or at Motherhood Unfiltered the podcast at gmail.com. It's your girl B Ivy, and we'll see you next week for part 3 of episode 7.